Well, today is Trinity Sunday, the only day of the year devoted to a doctrine, not an event like the birth of Jesus at Christmas or the resurrection of Jesus at Easter or Ascension or last week's Pentecost when the Spirit, the Ruah, the holy wind of God came down and gave the church a voice. But rather, Trinity Sunday is about an idea. It's the only Sunday devoted to an idea, a doctrine, a central belief of our faith. Do you know what the Oxford Dictionary defines as the doctrine of Trinity? You're going to love this. Trinity, doctrine of. The central dogma of Christian theology that the one God exists in three persons and one substance. This doctrine is held to be a mystery in the strict sense in that it can neither be known by unaided human reason apart from revelation, nor cogently demonstrated by reason after it has been revealed. On the other hand, it is maintained that though the mystery is above reason, it is not contrary to it, for it is not incompatible with the principles of rational thought. Okay, that settles that. Well, there's good news and bad news in this. The bad news is that for these two children sitting in the back there, Reeves and Walker Murphy, we're going to have to teach them that. We're going to have to find some way that they understand that doctrine. And of course, the other bad news is that we're going to have to understand it ourselves as well. But it's at the base of everything we do and everything we teach because it's about what God is like and what God does. So, the good news is that we're in good company. The greatest theologian of the church, except for Paul, the greatest theologian of the church, St. Augustine, said that this doctrine just wore him out theologically. He famously said, okay, if you don't believe in the Trinity, you will lose your soul. If you try to understand it, you will lose your mind. Better to think of good old St. Patrick, who was trying his best to explain to this pagan Irish king about how we believe in one God and yet three persons. And the king said, wait. Kind of in disgust. How can your God be three and yet be one? Patrick kind of shrugged his shoulders, looked around on the grass around him, and picked up three-leaf clover. He said, it's kind of like this. One stem, three leaves. And that's about as good a job as anybody has done, I guess. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to teach these children, and how, for that matter, how are we going to think about this doctrine ourselves? And while we're at it, let's just ask the question, why is this doctrine so darned important that we give it a whole Sunday? Well, after 30 years of assigning my assistants to preach on Trinity Sunday, you owe me, Clayton, I've come across a new way of looking at the Trinity. It's kind of a narrative way of explaining it that I want to share with you. It comes partly from Franciscan Richard Rohr and partly from the Episcopal priest Cynthia Bourgeau. It goes like this. When human beings are born, we automatically have what you might call a dualistic mind. We see everything as completely good or completely evil. We see everything either one or the other. When mother gives us food or comfort or warmth or what we want, we see mother as completely good. When mother has to withdraw something that does not please us, like dinner is over or time for bed, or prevents us, say, from running out in the street when we want to do that, for that instant, for that moment, mother is completely bad. It's one or the other. Now, of course, to grow up healthy means to learn that mother is a mixture of good and bad, and that there is complexity in life. There is ambiguity. There are gray areas. There are paradoxes in life. A paradox is when two opposite things can be true at the same time. I am a mixture of good and bad. And that's what these two new Christians will be learning from us, is life is paradox sometimes. But because we're human, we always have a little bit of that dualistic mindset hidden inside. As adults, we're always tempted to revert back to that easy, all good or all evil mindset. In the human's history, it's the source of all tribal conflict, all prejudice, and still is. It fundamentally sees the other as less than me or even evil. It is a temptation even in our faith. My religion is not just different, it's better than yours. My religion holds all the truth. Yours holds none of the truth. So the religious dualistic mind is preoccupied with rank, with hierarchy, with the question, who's in and who's out? Who is in or who is out of our faith system? So it makes sense that when religion stays dualistic, we end up imagining that God is an old man with a long beard who sits on his throne, and mainly judges. In that view, that's what God does mainly, is judge. He's a God whom you would describe as the critical spectator who keeps records of our mistakes and our shortcomings. It is a God who keeps up with who's in and who's out, who's included and who is excluded, and who, all of this based on merit or purity or moral achievement, on measuring up. And this dualistic God, as you can guess, finally separates everyone in the end into heaven or hell. There's no more dualistic theology than the heaven or hell theology. It's a God who occasionally dips into history to do nice things for people who deserve it. And as a pastoral aside, it stands to reason, of course, that if bad things happen to you, you must have done something to deserve it, or somehow failed to measure up to the God as judge. That's the critical spectator God that comes when we have that dualistic mind, always either or. That is a mark of fundamentalism. But then along comes Jesus, who completely disrupts the dualistic way of thinking. He disrupts the religious categories of clean versus unclean, acceptable people versus unacceptable people. He eats with sinners and tells stories about people who are redeemed and healed from the bottom up. A Jesus who outrageously asks us to pray for our enemies. A Jesus who tells stories that point to a God who is like a forgiving father, welcoming the prodigal, the guilty prodigal, back home to the utter frustration of the dualistic thinking brother. And so, what we are called to teach these two children and all of us is not simply a doctrine. It's the very nature of God. Who God is and what God does. That's why Trinity is so important. St. Bonaventure, a medieval Franciscan theologian that lived in the 1200s, came up with probably the best effort at language, the best effort to describe the Trinity. In Jesus, he says, we see this revelation. This is what Jesus reveals. That Jesus is the Son of the Father who reveals the heart of the Father. He is the Son of the Father who reveals the heart of the Father. Jesus tells us, Jesus reveals what God is really like, in other words. And that changes everything. God is not dualistic. God is not an old man with a long beard on the throne, judging who's in and who's out. That is, God is not a critical spectator, but could more rightly be described as an ultimate participant. Not a passive, he's ultimate participant. God is a kind of dynamo which constantly creates energy and life force, which we give the inadequate single word love. Bonaventure describes the Trinitarian God as a fountain fullness of love. And what does God do? God's essential activity is the emptying out and filling back up of love. Emptying out and filling back up with love. He says it's like one of those ancient water wheels with buckets all around that are constantly filling up with water and constantly emptying the water, filling up and emptying. In Bonaventure's sermons, by the way, there's no dualism, there's no hellfire and brimstone, no judgment, there's no merit, there's no damnation, no punishment, there's no wrath of God. God's essential activity is emptying out and filling back up with love. And that is how we are made in the image of God. We heard this morning from creation, God created us in God's image, and that's how we are made in God's image. And we have the potential of being that dynamo of love that is always emptying out, always filling back up. That's how we have the potential to be in God's image. One final image, and you can just think of this as extra credit. If you remember this word, it'll impress people somewhere. Jesus reveals to us a God who is perichoresis. Perichoresis. Again, this is extra credit. Para meaning around as perimeter. Choresis as in choreography or a dance, which is to say God is more like a circle dance. God is like a circle dance. God is dynamo, continual emptying out and filling up back of love. It is in this sense we are made in God's image. In the image of God, He made them. Jesus reveals that to humanity. Jesus is the revelation of the heart of the Father, not a critical spectator, but an ultimate participant. And of course, as we learned last week, that third part of the Trinity, the Ruach, the Spirit, it once teaches us this, even as it draws us into that dynamo of love. The church is still unpacking this. Well, I'm exhausted. We can be like Augustine and just get exhausted trying to figure the Trinity out. And we also need to remind ourselves that we can't finally put into words what is, by definition, unknowable mystery. But we can still believe it. We can still believe it. We can still believe in a God who is a dynamo of love, who is always emptying God's self and filling back up with love, which is the mystery of all mysteries. And parents, godparents, all of us who are about to promise to lift this child up in the light of that love and try to help that child understand, even as we ourselves understand, who is God and what God does. The other good news of today, parents, is that you don't have to understand the perikinesis of God. You just need to know and to teach these two children that the God of love is there for them. The God of love is there with them, for them, no matter what, no matter what, no matter what. And we can finally, in the end, be like Anne Lamott, who famously said, I don't need to understand the perikinesis of the Trinity. I just need to turn my life over to whoever came up with redwood trees. Parents, that's probably enough. And so now let us baptize in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.